Hi, this is Eternal King here bringing you another LOR video today. So, there hasn't been a ton of news in terms of what's going on with LOR right now. Um, in fact, I would say that Runeterra AR, just, post New Year's is kind of, the stats are a little wonky. Um, Talking about standard first, you basically have fearsome aggro. So fearsome, right? You know what miss race looks like. It's a deck that's been around for a long time. So currently miss race and standard are the highest win rate deck in that format at 54%. So not like amazing stats. But even in terms of standard, which is usually lower win rate, 54% is pretty average. So this is currently the best deck in the standard format. Not really much to talk about. If you've seen Mist Wraiths, Fearsome Aggro before, and Shadow Isles, you know exactly what the deck is. Talking about Eternal specifically, nothing about the format's really changed. Ziggs Poppy did see a bit of a dip in win rate temporarily. It went from about 70% to 60%. When people were trying their best to actually brew good decks that countered it. But people have stopped trying that, so it's back to 70% now. Like, that's basically how that works. Is that obviously Ziggs Poppy is the best autopilot deck in the game. It will consistently win 70% of games, whether it is Ziggs Poppy or my variant with Ziggs Vex. They both track at 70%. In terms of what people were doing that was working really well, it was just spell control. I had said previously that if you run decent spell control, Ziggs Poppy will just fall off a cliff. And that's exactly what we saw. It is essentially that people were running Make It Rain, and people were running... so again, Make It Rain being a cheap AoE solution, and then people were also running... essentially Bilgewater, Vile Feast, and they were running them both in the same deck, and it just turned out that that exact combination of spells worked exceptionally well. And that's all it really took, Tidal Invocation. So they basically played Tidal Invocation just like a Vile Feast, along with three Make It Rains, right? Like three Make It Rains, three Tidal Invocations, and then you run Ezreal, who basically turbo levels off of all the cheap targeting effects. And there's even like a Mystic Shot here in Bilgewater if you really want it with heavy metal. So like just cheap targeting effect spells that are good was all it really took. And again, like even in P&Z, there's like Divine Draft, which will work kind of like a Make It Rain at slow speed, right? So these cards have always existed in the game. Nothing has really changed. It's just that you'll have times where legacy players will take a really consistent effort to counter certain decks during the ladder season, and then you'll have other off-meta season, like off-ladder seasons, where people just give up essentially. And they're like, the deck's too good. Ziggs Poppy is not too good. It has existed in LOR Eternal for many, many, many seasons. Typically, it averages 60% as long as there are people playing in the format that know what they're doing. The fact that it went 70%, almost uncontested for like most of the last Eternal season, is just a testament to people who are left playing the game not knowing how to play the game. Like, let me be more specific. Like, for example, we have players still who are very, very good at piloting aggro. You can be a top 5% aggro. You could be, a top 10 aggro. Like, you could literally grind out Eternal Ladder with this deck and be top 10 aggro, no problem. And the same thing with Ziggs Poppy, right? You can do that, no problem. And there are players left in the game that know how to do that. But you ask them, okay, well, if this is one of the best decks, how do you beat it? And if you ask them that question, there are far fewer players left in the community that can actually respond to these types of things. Honestly, I'm probably one of them. I basically learned from some of the best players. I learned from Mega Mogwai. I learned from Swim, who's no longer, with the community. I learned from Majin Bey, who is no longer with the community. I learned from Grappler, who is no longer with the community. So I learned from a lot of like the top players on how to counter specific decks and how to track stats accurately and how to pilot decks properly. More so, and to the point that I'm actually kind of one of the only players left keeping a candle for certain archetypes. So like you talk about swim. I'm the only person left that has a list for swim elusives. So like I will have swim elusives in my deck lineup till the day that I die because it is a forever deck. We've talked about this before about how certain decks in Legends of Runeterra will last the test of time because they always do what they do well. So basically playing cheap elusives and then playing a bunch of cheap burst spells to buff them. Veiled Blessing gives them 2+2. Blessing of Targon gives them 3+3. Battle Bonds will give two things 2+2, and so on and so forth. Darkened Lodestone, obviously, basically spreading out 2+2 over two targets. Pale Cascade, 1+1 cycle, and like that's how the whole deck works. And then there's a little bit of burn to just get you there. Just spam Mystic Shots into the opponent's face, essentially. And occasionally you might play Harazi to turn one of your little elusives much, much bigger and give them spell shield, essentially. But the game's gotten faster, so Harazi doesn't come down as often on 8, but he might come down sometimes. And like that's a forever deck. Nothing about this deck needs to change. Based on my extensive testing, there is no version of elusives that is, strictly speaking, better, like more consistent better. Like you have, very niche applications of elusives where you can play Encroaching Shadows, give all allies in your deck 2+2. So it's essentially a case of where you try to high roll Encroaching Shadows into a handful of elusives. And you can do that sometimes, but just like statistically, it's not going to work as often, based on my testing. And then the other one that you can try is Ionia. Ionia has access to. There was one of the variety packed elusive cards, which is kind of interesting. Prancing Sea Spirits. So you can try Prancing Sea Spirits with Targon, and then try to like buff. Hand buff it, I played around with that. Again, not as consistent. So you can try Encroaching Shadows with Sea Spirits or hand buffing with Sea Spirits or what have you. But typically not as consistent as good old swim elusives. Thankfully, like basically just because of the inclusion of Veiled Blessing, that was all this deck needed to go over the top, because you used to have Sparklefly here. Sparklefly was understated, a little too slow. The fact that you just have now 9 burst protection cards, 12 burst protection cards in a elusive spam shell is very powerful. So yeah, it's just like there's just so much burst protection in this deck that if you aren't running Flocks or Disintegrates or Vengeances or Hard Removal, you're basically just gonna lose. That's how this deck functions. There are specific lists that can race it. You can try to race the deck, but like in terms of being able to answer it effectively, it's basically Flocks, Disintegrates, and Hard Removal, which people just don't run right now because they don't know how to play Spell Control. There's far fewer people who know how to play Spell Control than there are people left in the game that know how to play aggro. And that's just thanks to Standard, right? Like I talked before about what's the best deck in Standard right now. It's Fearsome Aggro. And if you want to be the best Standard player in the format, all you have to know how to do is play Fearsome Aggro, and you're kind of done at that point. Meanwhile, in Eternal, there is value to understanding how to play all of the archetypes, aggro, mid-range, control, and of course combo. For example, my Rise is probably the scariest Rise that you can find in the game currently. It's been ratioed out something like 20 times for optimizations, and at this point, it's an absolute nightmare to play against. It is like if I was facing against a player that like knew what they were doing, I would be absolutely terrified, because it is just so polarizing of a deck. And I admit, as an MTG player, like a lot of my decks are polarizing. My Rise is polarizing so that it's like maximum stall. It is like it is the stalliest of Rise shells that exists in the game. It is stuns, it is bounces, it is non-stop healing. And a little bit of creature fodder, and then one Spirit Fire just in like those very niche scenarios where you need it. It's there because typically Rise would run one Spirit Fire. They'd run it as a Tellstones. I just don't bother with the Tellstones portion. Like that's basically what I do. And yeah, again, it really is just a case of like I'm not seeing as much variety on Runeterra AR as I used to. You have your Eddie, you have your Ziggs Poppy, and then people have kind of just given up. All the temple lists that were being tracked are gone. So there's no temple list being tracked right now. There's none of, there's no Sun Disk. There's no, Swain Nora, right? Swain Nora has existed on Runeterra AR for the Eternal format as long as Ziggs Poppy, and then the stats are just gone. I don't know if it's because nobody can pilot Swain Nora. Like, I don't know what the issue is. It's not a hard deck to pilot. You play your chumpers, and then you play your cheap removal, and then you just slam high value, your high value 5 drop and your high value 6 drops, and then your boat, and like it's fairly straightforward. As long as Nora's coming down on 2, you should be winning games. Um, I guess maybe it has a bad matchup into Eddie. Like, maybe. I don't know. I usually include 2 broad mains just for that case, because like Enraged Fire Spitter is better at killing aggro decks, and then Lord Broadmane is better at dealing with a lot of big stuff spam, because then your pings are just like doubling as hard removal. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's just a little strange. I know that a lot of people have started to move away from LOR. I myself only play occasionally, but when I do play, it seems like I'm playing a different game than everyone else because I just auto roll. Like that's usually my experience in LORs. I'm just in Eternal specifically. I'm just auto rolling people because I'm playing a different game than them. Uh, if you were to ask me like what do I see, I'll see people like bring out like a Hecarim deck, right? Hecarim decks are like just swing into face, don't think. Very standard player mentality. It's not ideal in many situations to be playing the Eternal format that way. So, for example, if you were to ask me what is the best Hecarim card that you should be playing around, like period, full stop, how do you play Hecarim in the Eternal format? Yeah, the answer is Rally card, right? So like really the only card that matters in Hecarim, and this is like a little bit of an oversimplification, but the only card that really matters is his Rally. Oh, that's an Ionia. So yeah, you go in Ionia and you grab that. Beep, beep, beep. Here we go, Dragon Ambush. Dragon Ambush is like the only card that matters in Hecarim. The rest of the cards that you build in Hecarim do not matter other than Dragon Ambush. And the reason for that specifically is because you can spam out creatures very effectively with Hecarim, and you don't really need to worry about it too much. And therefore, you actually reach a critical mass at a certain point where it's like, I don't need to be spamming more creatures with Hecarim because I'm already basically spamming as hard as I possibly can, right? So you think about like, oh, people will typically go sparring student, right? And then if you're gonna go sparring student, you should go landmark. The other best card in Hecarim is the countdown landmark. So it is definitely going to be Iron Conquest, right? So if I say that the Dragon Ambush is best card number 1, best card number 2 is Iron Conquest because it's the only card in the game currently that gives Hecarim a little bit of sustainability. And then after that, yeah, now you've got your Dragon Ambush and you've got your Iron Conquest. You can just build your most efficient creature spam shell. Maybe if you want to get really spicy, you'll put some spells in there, right? But that's typically it in terms of the right way to build a deck. Like I would probably go Zed because Zed's good with sparring student and it draws a certain amount of necessary removal. It's like a Mystic Shot check. It's like, do you have Mystic Shot in your deck or do you not? Because if you don't, then Zed just gets to have fun. Some sort of burst protection usually is correct in Hecarim, so usually you'll do like a Mark of the Isles in a Hecarim shell. So at least you have like a little bit of something going on here with the Dragon Ambush, the Iron Conquest, and the Mark of the Isles. And then you have your creature spam shell. That's more or less correct in terms of how to play Hecarim. But if you start removing some of this stuff, right? and now you're just running it like this, and it's just more things that say, you know, ephemeral. If that's all you're going for with your deck, you're building wrong for the Eternal format, in my opinion, right? If you're just like this and then everything that says ephemeral on it, this one, right? You're just going by keyword essentially. You're just like, okay, if it says ephemeral, it's going in the deck. If you're just doing this, that's the wrong way to build Hecarim. Typically speaking, is that you want to be all in on the Dragon Ambush, and you want to be all in on the countdown landmark. You want to have a little bit of burst for reach and for protection in most cases, especially if you want to go the Zed route. But yeah, and then of course the other way to go Hecarim is to go Gwen, and then Gwen also does some interesting things. Specifically, putting opponents in a difficult position. If they try to race you with Gwen, you're going to get some healing off of Gwen, right? So you can also try like Hecarim Gwen, Hecarim Zed, solo Hecarim, but again, remembering what your good cards are that give the deck value, which is Dragon Ambush and then Iron Conquest. If you're just building a creature spam shell, there are better creature spam shells. Like, strictly speaking, Azir Aurelia will spam ephemeral tokens better than Hecarim if that's all you're trying to do. If your entire deck is just, I want to spam ephemeral tokens, Azir Aurelia will do it better. And it does it with like high landmark value. Again, Emp Army, Dais. It does it with the likes of good spells like Desert's Wrath. And then again, there is a little bit of reactivity with Defiant Dance. So strictly speaking, if you're going to pick one of those to play, Hecarim or Azir Aurelia, like Azir Aurelia is just the better, you know, board spammy deck. But again, there's actually a lot of level up consideration with Azir Aurelia. You can play board spammy Hecarim and not really worry about leveling Hecarim. Azir Aurelia, you kind of have to know how to get the triple attack off with you know, the synergies. And if you don't know how to play high synergy Azir Aurelia, you're going to have a harder time with the deck. And in fact, we've even seen the win rates of Azir Aurelia kind of drop down a little bit, about 2%. It used to be a 60% win rate deck. Now it's 58% win rate. It's just the people that are left in the game that know how to play Eternal as a format is decreasing. And therefore, one of the best decks that's in the format is not being piloted optimally currently, because it's harder to pilot than straight up aggro, generally speaking. That's it for today. Just like, again, I haven't done an LOR video in a little while. I wanted to give the community updates, but basically it's standard is, you know, underrepresented in terms of deck variety right now, and the win rates are very low, and the decks are kind of old staples that aren't that impressive. In terms of Eternal, win rates remain very high. They remain 70%, 65%, very high win rates. But then we've kind of forgotten some of the, you know, we've lost a lot of the lists that we had during the last season. Just because, you know, every time the season ends, they kind of get wiped away. That's it for today. Signing out.